All right, everybody. Thanks for almost filling the room on a Friday morning. Hope everybody's had a good conference. So we're going to dive into, we've heard 2FA, MFA. Yesterday, Lance Peterman introduced FA. So we're going to hopefully, these guys have been in the trenches, and we're going to dig down into some of what it took them to set up their multi-factor, their FIDO implementations, and so we'll run through that. We've got Michael Engan.
Yep, I'll get started.
I'm going to say, introduce everybody. Principal Systems Architect for T-Mobile. Marcio Mello, Director and Head of Product for Intuit. Andrew Shikiar, who's the Executive Director and CMO of the FIDO Alliance. And Tejas Dharamshi, who is Senior Security Software Engineer at Netflix. So just to kick off with the first question, would take some time, build some context here. So Marcio, I'll let you go first. Tell us a bit about your authentication project, your requirements, your goals, and and what you guys were able to achieve.
Sure. I want to give some context before we jump into
definitely.
it. I've been in identity for many years, about 15 years, and it's been a long journey. Even before that, when I was young, still dating my wife, I said to her, for some reason, one day we're going to have some sort of a chip, in our hands, embedded in our hands, so we can kill passwords once for all. She looked at me, it's like, she still married me for some reason, but the desire to kill passwords comes from many years, and I think we are all in this together, and it's great to have an industry now together towards eliminating this key problem for all of our customers, for them to enjoy their digital life. At Intuit, I've been there for about 10 months, so our journey in terms of supporting 2FA, MFA started way before my time at Intuit. But as you can imagine, Intuit is a market leader with products like QuickBooks, TurboTax, Mint, and our customers basically trust us with their most sensitive information, their financial life, the prosperity of their business, their families, themselves. It all depends on the products and services we provide. And identity, authentication, profile data is at the center of all of that. It really enables them to be able to have a trusted ecosystem that Intuit has provided to the market. And I think MFA starts with having a leadership, a company that has crossed the bridge, that understands that what we do together is no longer about adding friction, pain, and drops in the customer life cycle. It's about enabling the business. Doing it right, MFA can actually enable growth, can increase engagement, and more importantly, increase retention of high-value accounts. Sure, when we started, now back to your question, like everybody else, you start with the pendulum swinging way to the far into the security side. So it's not really about convenience. So we added the normal stuff, KBA, email challenge, in addition to the username and password. And as you know, the drops, the success rates are not what we expect. This was back in 2015. As we moved into 16, 17, the team started to innovate, started to learn about what was available in the industry, using more of the phone, like OTP over SMS, normal stuff, OTP over voice and email, and then phone API to verify phone information. But I think that the big leap, and I was privileged to start there in 2018, we started to really invest on factors that are much more seamless, and FIDO was a critical part of that. The implementation of FIDO in our iOS apps, TurboTax Mobile, for instance, was phenomenal. We saw, first of all, during the enrollment, we saw basically no drops. Our data analysts compared before and after, and adding the FIDO biometrics into the flow, first of all, did not cause any drops in the onboarding. But more importantly, the success rates for signing were basically 100%. I have to say it's 99.9, okay. But it doesn't compare to any other factor. If you compare to OTP over SMS, if you get 80, 85% success, you're lucky. And that was a phenomenal eye-opening thing for us, that investing on a framework that will allow us to innovate, reduce friction, and add more factors over time was just the right path to do. And our FIDO implementation, both server and client, was done in partnership with Knock Knock. And we're learning together, we're doing things together. We added now the biometrics into our Android apps as well, and the same results we were seeing. And then I'll save the more data for later if we have time in terms of what's next. But again, start with the things that reduce friction and make sense to your customer life cycle. You have to understand your journey first and foremost. And if you have multiple apps, please build your MFA, focus on the entry point, the user intent first, and not a one-size-fits-all.
Michael, you want to go next and give us some context on your project?
Sure. So I've been at T-Mobile for 8 years as a principal engineer in our authentication, authorization, API security group, helping roll out T-Mobile ID and all of its painful fits and spurts as we first rolled it out.
Now, this is all customer-facing.
This is all customer-facing.
Right.
I'm a consumer authentication expert, not corporate authentication. We make a kind of a divided world in T-Mobile. On the consumer side, typing passwords on the phone is painful, right? We have all those annoying rules. You have to switch from your capitalized keyboard to your lowercase keyboard to your symbol keyboard. It's not a very fun experience. All the KBA approaches were pretty millennial focused. So, what was your address 3 years ago? They barely remember the address 6 months ago. What number did you call? My son doesn't know phone numbers. KBA wasn't an approach, and we're a phone company. Sending SMSs or sending emails, it was painful. So we looked at rolling out FIDO, and when we went with FIDO, we wanted to go with Knock Knock for our solution. We wanted to do best practice, and we spent a lot of time thinking about that user experience that we wanted to get. Did we want users to be able to pick any authenticator? Did we want to lock it down to just the one? We ended up trying to make as few choices for the users as possible. So we rolled out just the fingerprint, and then when the Apple made their upgrade, we switched it to Face ID on those devices. Our forgot password flows at one point were running at about 65% of all users on mobile were entering the forgot password flow. So just users didn't remember their password. It was a painful experience. We had points where people were complaining that they would try their 5 passwords and then they get the reset password, and then we wouldn't let them use the password they had just tried using. Our forgot passwords dropped to 7% after we rolled it out. Our iOS penetration is incredibly high. We did a study at one point on iOS. Apple actually helped publish the results. It was 89% of users scan their fingers more than 80 times a day. And when we were actually doing the user journey conversations with the users after some of the testing, they were saying they were counting the steps, and they didn't even count authentication as a step when it was through our FIDO flows. And when we were going through password flows, it was like a 3-step process that the users were counting. So it just definitely took off. Android side was a little weird. Half of Android users don't turn on FIDO, and they keep using passwords. But it's an option. So.
All right.
Monopolize the time. Sorry, I'll let you guys.
Okay. All right, Andrew, you want to take it next? Go
yeah, sure. Okay. So obviously I haven't done a deployment, so I'm kind of here, for the FIDO perspective, looking at the, the broader industry at large and what, we're seeing with take-up, across the globe. One thing I kind of want to mention, though, this has been a really good week here at Identiverse for FIDO. It's been really nice to see FIDO referenced, in addition to the direct sessions that we had, seeing FIDO referenced in the keynotes and other contexts. So I feel like that shows that FIDO is becoming part of the fiber of Identiverse and of identity itself, which is really important. And so there's been a lot of emphasis around FIDO 2, which is great. I mean, FIDO 2 is a very significant milestone for FIDO Alliance as it represents the platformization of FIDO. It's bringing FIDO into the platforms, which makes these deployment issues easier over time as the devices roll over. One cool thing about this panel here is that we have different use cases and different technologies, right? So I'm a T-Mobile customer, happy customer. I used to have that same password reset flow to just bang my head against the wall, and then I use the app now. It's absolutely fantastic. But I think that when you look at FIDO, you look at these mobile applications, FIDO UAF, which is the specification that enables this, is a great way of actually reaching a lot of customers right now for mobile-first scenarios. But it's not a be-all. That's not the end of the journey, right? So when I look at FIDO UAF and I look at our suite of specifications, going with a mobile-first approach could be the first step of a longer journey towards a full implementation of FIDO 2. So you want to work with a vendor, for example, or build your own universal server, where you can start with the mobile-first implementation and then be on the path towards implementing FIDO 2 and web authentication and leveraging the full set of specifications at that point. So we see a lot of companies do that as they're deploying. Some companies will start internally in the enterprise and then take those learnings and roll them out. Some companies start mobile first and then they go web. So there's really no wrong answer here. It's all the right answer. But at the end of the day, it's all FIDO authentication, whether it's FIDO UAF, FIDO 2, it doesn't matter to me. It's all using public key cryptography. It's all getting rid of dependence on passwords, and it's all simpler, stronger authentication.
All right. Tejas, you give us the FIDO 2 perspective.
Yeah. My name is Tejas Dharamshi. I'm a senior security engineer at Netflix on the Netflix's identity and access. So the part that I deal with is on the corporate side. So you got a perspective on how you can things are going on the consumer side, but I deal with the corporate side of things, where the vectors and the combination of users and the things that we are trying to protect is quite different. And the landscape, basically. We have our partners, our ecosystem of users across the globe. So when we started getting into this process of how would we go about approaching multi-factor authentication to tackle all these various different user base, which have very different set of technical expertise and experiences. So how would we go about that in terms of what kind of options would make sense? And more importantly, how can we reach as many number of users as possible, which makes having the reachability to be there, to the browsers, to the devices, to the mobile devices, to the actual machines on which they're interacting. So the reach has to be quite wide. So that's where we started going in the direction of FIDO 2 specifically and WebAuthn. And that's where we thought that's where we can actually get the maximum buck from for returns, specifically when we want to actually protect phishing attacks specifically. So that's where we started investing into creating native support for WebAuthn into our ecosystem. And more importantly, these newer standards are great because you can have that reach available, but at the same time, our end user experience is super important because people don't understand any of these terminologies, especially end users. And for us to come up with things which are very simple, the end user experience has to be top notch. So you go through Chrome, you go through Safari, you go through Edge. Well, Safari's still not there, but you go through Edge or any other type of browser. You get the similar experience, and the experience being catered from the browser, from the operating system. That gives you that awesome, seamless experience that people will be used to. So we have started in that direction, and we have some interesting numbers to go with as well. The entire business was very skeptical in terms of introducing these new technologies, and we were initially thinking whether we should pull off or not. But as we started rolling it out, it was so interesting to see that the initial X number of users that got enrolled into the process were using security keys. and which was a really interesting aspect for us to prove the business that that's not the way we should be thinking about deploying newer technologies. So now we are in a process of, so we have various sets of user base. We have customer service, which is basically dealing with support for anyone who is going on to Netflix.com. So we have made sure we've deployed keys all across. So we are talking about more than 7,000 users in our ecosystem, right? Then we have people who are working on our productions, and they're working all across the globe. And we don't want to be in the mix of introducing things which might not make sense. So as these productions are rolled out, certain things get given to them, including a notion of keys as well, and other forms of authentication options. For the corporate side, and particularly employees, that's an easier aspect to tackle, where in day one you come to the company, you get a key for you, right? So that's the other aspect which is going awesome as well in our ecosystem. So and our partner journey, which is comprising of vendors, ISP partners. So we are trying to tackle it in multiple different ways, where either we distribute keys to them, or we make sure like the experience provides them the capability to buy it directly from the auth process. And so yeah, so it's been great, and I think it's just going to get better as we keep rolling it out, and looking forward to this.
All right, so Michael, I'll start with you on this question. These projects never get off the ground until the guys with the wallets show up, right? So I'm wondering, and every time you ask somebody about these projects, they always say, well, we had to get, management buy-in. So how did that discussion go for you? I mean, what was the buy-in part that when you went to management and said, hey, we want to do this thing, will you give us some money?
Those are always fun conversations. Yeah, at T-Mobile, a lot of our costs are around calls to the call center. And we very much brand ourselves as being supportive of our users. So we're happy anytime a user wants to call our call center. But frequently those users start wanting to get into an app and get it done themselves. And if they, for instance, get into that forgot password flow, they get stuck up, and so then they're calling the call center already frustrated, and they're already trying to, they just wanted to get something else done. And so it was really just trying to get that customer satisfaction, and it proves out less of our accounts getting locked, less of users wanting to call care, because there are users that just want to do it themselves without talking to a human. And so yeah, it was fairly straightforward when you cost out how much a call costs over millions of users. Yeah.
Right. Marcio, what was your conversation like for?
No, it's similar. When you start putting the data associated with the investment on MFA, you start usually with your customer success, that we call it Intuit, or customer support, seeing significant reduction in customer support calls related to sign-in, and most importantly, account recovery. As you can imagine, for one of our products, TurboTax, most users are not like waking up every day dying to go use TurboTax. They usually wait for the last day possible to go file their taxes once a year. And you can imagine that if they come back a year later, likelihood they will remember that password, it's quite small. So having invested in other ways for them to identify themselves, we innovated with Identifier First, which is something that now allows users to provide us with different ways to identify themselves, their phone number, their email, other methods than just the username that they can't remember as well. That combined with the reduction in password reset flow, as well as ATO reduction in our account takeovers, that by itself kind of sells itself. But when you add on top of everything the new factors like I talked about, and things that we're investing in the future, that actually changes radically the paradigm of how users start onboarding and using first-time usage of our products, instead of putting the friction of the stuff we own up front, putting that as the user goes, as they're starting to play with our products, like delayed friction as much as possible. Now you change the conversation radically. It's not just about ATO reduction and password reset reduction, but it's about growing the business and making the journey of the users much more delightful, because they can experiment the products before we start asking about friction, username, password. So having that flexibility, because the factors we have now, they're not a pain in the butt. Sorry for the terminology, but I hate passwords. It changed the conversation. So it wasn't that hard. Actually, it wasn't hard at all. I think the company is all in to make Intuit and our ecosystem secure, convenient, and really innovative in terms of the auth factors we use.
Tejas, can you?
Yeah, I would say the same. Like specifically around the password resets, that's been both internal, external. Like regardless of wherever you have passwords, that's the worst experience you can get. So password resets was one of the drivers, and that was easy enough to sell the business. But considering our corporate ecosystem and considering our partners, which are very wide range of partners and very wide range of business, which actually support these various different partners. So we have to communicate and collaborate and make sure all of these business engagement folks, they understand what's coming. So getting a buy-in from them through proposals, through memos, and communication was another key aspect to get this word out. Another interesting aspect, the way we were able to actually get more traction in the spaces, there were several different native applications being built in our ecosystem to cater to different business use cases. So baking into those apps to make sure like people are using the same thing to access or to do their day-to-day work is the same app they would actually go about like leveraging for carrying out these better authentication flows. So that was another way like we approached in terms of getting that leverage going on. So yeah, various different ways.
All right. So I'm going to ask you to follow up on that with another question. So how did standards factor into your decision, and what sort of options do those give you, do the standards give you for future projects? I mean, I'm sure there was a continuation effect from that.
Yeah, standards, especially like personally, I believe in adopting standards to the core, and they give a lot of power. And I just gave a presentation a couple of days ago, like on how this specific standard around WebAuthn and FIDO2 changes the game altogether. For example, as I gave in my presentation as well, like we try to gamify MFA a little bit as in our offering, wherein you come up with or you enroll into certain options, and newer options and better options gets unlocked, right? And this is where standards actually help you achieve that. Meaning, I can use roaming authenticators, I can use keys. Now I can start using my native devices itself, right? Like that's the power you get when you're on track. And plus, it gives you the seamless experience, meaning if I'm a user who's used to using Windows Hello all the time, why would I want to just pick up a phone and use another thing which is completely out of nowhere, right? I should just continue to use Windows Hello for ongoing verification or authentication processes. So this is where, like, I think standards help you, like, go in that direction and get the best value out for specifically keeping the end users in the mix.
Marcio, you got a thought on that?
Well, it's kind of a looking ahead in terms of what's next. No question, doubling down on standards on FIDO and starting to implement things like WebAuthn, being able to allow our customers to have a true cross-platform experience and not having to, I'm coming from an old PC, I cannot use this, or it's a phone, or it's whatever it is. Intuit is a cross-platform company. It has to work everywhere. So that's a big challenge. And having the ability to use authentication factors that are standards-based, like using FIDO for the mobile devices, but also now expanding that to the desktop in terms of the web experience and the mobile web as well. It's extremely exciting. I would love to leave, well, I know it's early still, but we still have some time, but I would leave folks with at least a couple of thoughts. One is all about combining active factors with passive factors. We have to remember that multi-factor authentication The best active factors are the ones that are seamless, the ones we just talked about. But you cannot success without combining your active factors with your passive factors. What I call passive factors are the signals that the users don't have to do anything about it. So let's not forget that a lot of partners, a lot of companies have invested heavily to help companies like ours that have a B2C, a B2B story to accelerate our passive factors, impossible travel, device fingerprinting, IP address, email, reputation. All of these things are incredibly valuable because they can make your MFA that much stronger because, one, the user doesn't have to do anything about it. The legit users will not be bothered, but the bad guys will be blocked even before they try to attempt to use or break one of our active factors. So combining active and passive factors is the way to go. The other thing that I would say is, having a mentality around progressive profile and adaptive authentication. There is no one size fits all. You have to look at where the user's coming from and have your authentication being intelligent, being adaptive to the entry point. So using the standards to be able to, one, if the user's coming from Mint, in our case, or coming from QuickBooks and they want to start playing with the product, let's do it, the profile in a progressive way. But if they want to start filing their taxes, we should add the protection as soon as possible because they're entering very sensitive data. So again, try as much as possible to use MFA in a way that meets the customer journey and the desired level of friction by the customer. So those are two thoughts that I would love to keep with this audience because we're all in this together. We're all learning, we're all making it better, and I believe this is the right direction moving forward.
Michael, give us your thoughts on standards.
Yeah, and I'll follow it up with some other comments on adaptive as well. So yeah, standards were very important for us. We wanted to go fast and we wanted to do it securely. And anything we did outside of the standard meant a whole lot more time trying to figure out and confirm it was going to be safe or not. And we just didn't want to take that risk to our consumer base. So yeah, we've been very happy with the FIDO, especially the U2F, and now starting to take a look at the WebAuthn. The CTAP, I think, has got some really interesting pieces in the leg as we're working on some other projects with the other carriers. But yeah, standards were very important to our solution. And on a comment for the adaptive, and I've heard some other people talk about it this week, credentials have a life cycle. And on our consumer side, for instance, there's people out there that factory reset their phone every week. And, we end up with, these long histories of public keys for the same user. Or, there's users that don't set up, a good, strong FIDO authentication. So we still have to support other methods. But we can use those as signals that, this user had a FIDO and wants to use a password on this authentication. Let's step that up and figure out why and add the extra authenticators. We have users, in our network, if you lose your phone, you've lost your FIDO key. Well, you could be trying to call us to tell us that you've lost your phone. So being able to have lots of choices to authenticate those users and being able to get those credential life cycles and get those MFAs set back up, giving them lots of MFA options. Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to add a few additional things on top of that. Is it's about reducing end user friction at the end of it. So multi-factor auth, doing it every single time is obviously the worst experience that you would actually come up with, right? So, but when you actually do it, and how you do it, it's important. So that's where you have to adapt to every single possible request that's coming into your network, and adapt to things that might sound fishy or things might not be usual. So yeah, definitely adaptively authenticating and looking into various different aspects. Both some things which are dynamic in nature in terms of where the user is coming from. Some things might be very static in nature in terms of users, maybe the geographical or organizational aspects. Right, so combining those things together, and at the end of it, what exactly is the target thing that they're trying to interact with? What's the risk level of that, right? Like, so the asset risk or the resource risk. So combining all those things together and then prompting them for additional factor is a key. But when stronger factors are used, specifically if they end up going, like using a security key, for example, you get a really higher assurance in terms of, hey, this method is phishing resistant, so we can actually bump up like the assurance level, and that way we can actually ask a user to verify less and less. So that's.
Andrew, you probably get this question all the time, right? Why am I gonna roll out something standardized? Why am I gonna roll out FIDO?
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, obviously, I'm pro standards, being with FIDO Alliance. Pro standards, anti-cancer, pro education, running for president. Going to have a town hall soon. So I think when people look at deploying FIDO, so anecdotally, I get a lot of insights into this. I think that there's a couple drivers, and the panelists has talked about this. So I think traditionally, reducing fraud has been a driver, and I think that a lot of vendors sell on that message, and it's a pretty obvious one. The challenge there is I think a lot of organizations have a fraud cost kind of baked into their budgets. People have come to accept a certain amount of fraud, which shouldn't be acceptable, but that's already kind of baked into how organizations look at their costs and the risk factors. More and more, and so I love what Marcio is saying. We see companies looking at authentication as a top-line business issue. Right, so not just as a way to save money, but to make money, to facilitate more customer throughput, to facilitate more service consumption, to build brand affinity. So I think more and more people see FIDO and as a standard that can enable that. And then moving forward, my hope is, and my thought is that people will start to associate, share that they're using FIDO externally. So FIDO starts to stand for better way of doing authentication that protects user privacy. It's privacy enhancing, it's unphishable, so that when they use that brand, they let people know they have a FIDO certified offering, whether their audience is a business partner, their audience is an employee, or ultimately when their audience is a consumer, we think that brand will resonate and will be another kind of a marketing benefit and a sales benefit to those organizations.
All right. Which leads me into what my next question was. Do you guys have a follow-up to that? I mean, were these sorts of some of the thoughts and gyrations you went through when you were rolling out or planning to roll out your deployments? The business strategy side of it?
Oh, 100%. I think our world, the people that are in our situation that love identity authentication, love the possibility of removing passwords from our users' digital life, things have shifted. We're in a new era of identity and authentication and profile, right? We're celebrating 10 years of Identiverse, and I think this marks a very important time. It's almost like a critical time that we're shifting the conversation from pain, friction, that identity is a tax and authentication is a pain, to it's an enabler, it's a business enabler. The conversation has shifted. We all need to do that. It's about unlocking new possibilities. The additional two things that I will leave with you guys is, remember that profile data is a huge, huge opportunity to deliver personalized experiences. So the stuff that we collect, from a factors perspective that they use, the devices they use to log in, how far in the profile completion they are, all of that is gold for your marketing peers, for your CRM peers, for your support peers. We own that data. That data it's a gold mine. We got to protect it, and we got to use it to personalize and provide a more delightful journey for our customers. So identity data is an enabler, period. And then on the trust side, because we can't forget the trust, in our case, just imagine our ecosystem. We have consumers filing their taxes. We have small businesses running their business on QuickBooks. We have experts that connect with consumers and small business to provide services. So we have a huge ecosystem where trust is everything. So for some of these personas, some of these actors, we need to add friction early because we want to make sure that they're verified. So we're looking at things like identity proofing that FIDO is starting to look at now. I think the future also walks hand in hand with personalization, but more importantly, establishing trust early on so we can trust the parties that our businesses are connecting together. So I'll leave that with you guys because it's pretty goddamn exciting, to be honest with you.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, our brand is the uncarrier. And so delightful, smooth, exciting experiences are important. So yeah, no, our corporate strategy was definitely a part of why we chose to go with FIDO and why we chose to implement MFA, and a much better experience than what we had before.
The corporate like landscape is the threat vectors are really different, and the things to lose is tremendous. Like personally, from like a personal brand damage. So we did. That's why we obviously like decided to go against or go with like using or having MFA into our ecosystem and specifically adopt like standards. And another aspect was. Specifically like account takeovers is one aspect, but the other aspect is because we are dealing with vendors, we are dealing with partners, we are dealing with freelancers. For them to actually make a business out of our engagement, meaning sell the accounts that we have provisioned for them to other folks, that kind of attack vector as well is something we want to also mitigate against. And going against stronger form of multi-factor authentication options was key, but also investing into like adaptively authenticating to requests, trying to correlate like where this user is coming from, what factors is using to mitigate against various different forms of such attacks. Like we wanted to invest heavily. So multi-factor auth and adaptive auth was the right strategy for us to go with, and that's why I invested heavily. Yeah.
All right. Let me ask you one more question, and maybe we can have some questions from the audience. But just quickly, where do you see things going in the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, what's on the horizon for your authentication system, maybe even your whole IAM environment?
Project Verify. There is, as a mobile company, we look at the phone being the primary user experience. So we were always a little hesitant. I don't want to say hesitant, but we've always been looking at WebAuthn and how we wanted to play. We like the ability to turn on your phone, the fact that your phone is next to your PC is already logged in. We like some of those authenticator options that are coming. We are looking at a lot of additional signals. So when it comes to the hundreds of signals we gather today in order to shut down bot traffic, to the new signals that allow us to increase the IAL of users so that it's not just a similar user coming back, but we've actually proven their real world identity to bind it to that online identity. And in the consumer space, that's a big tackle. Yeah.
Marcio?
Pretty quickly. Mobile push to our native apps. We got to leverage more of our native apps and rely less on OTP over SMS.
Let me help you with that.
I'll take it.
An alliance is born.
WebAuthn, obviously, we already said that. And identity proofing, ways of us to accelerate trust through government-issued documents, passport, driver's license, and other certifications, because again, like I said, we have a bunch of experts that want to provide service to our customers, and they better prove that they have the credentials that they say they have. So those three, I would say, are the top priority. And again, it's crazy exciting because those things are not going to cause a lot of friction for our customers, but it will raise the bar in terms of trust, which is what this is all about. I don't think there is a better time. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I tell my team, I don't think there's a better time to be working on identity. I honestly believe that the technology is getting there, the excitement is there, I think we are privileged as an industry to be working on something that's going to, in our lifetime, hopefully change the way people enjoy their digital lives and kill passwords for once for all.
Yeah, I was going to just interject something there. I mean, I've followed this space for a long time, and it just feels to me like we are the closest we've ever been to having a real solid set of standards and specifications to, to really do authentication correctly. So, Tejas, go ahead.
Yeah, 100% agree with you. I think like one of the key aspects what Marcio also indicated is like ID verification. That is a key ingredient, especially when you're implying like trust in people who are going to work for you, but they truly are not. Like we don't manage their payroll, so ID verification is super crucial, and that's where I think like at least for the next few years we are investing heavily in as well to go in that direction. And I think like another interesting aspect is relationships. Right? Everyone starts with the journey with an identity, but there are different forms of identity: device, user, application, and how these different pieces of identities are interacting with each other through various different relationships. I think that's where I think like the next investment is going to be, specifically to figure out that mesh of relationship. And the final bit, I think, like we talk about great authentication, but I think authorization is also another interesting aspect. So I think that's where I see like great stuff being done in that space, and specifically with us as well.
So maybe Web Auth Z next time?
Of course.
So John, when I look at this question, it's a little bit different, obviously, but looking at it from FIDO's perspective, we shared this week, some of our new activities. All right, so identity verification, that's a big step for us, and IoT authentication is as well. So, looking forward for FIDO, it's like, what can we do as an organization? What can we aim to standardize? What other standards can we align with and partner with without reinventing anything to help, smooth deployments? And so I think the identity verification initiative that we're just kicking off is really important. And the first thing, again, what we're going to do is create some performance criteria for the document authentication vendors out there, so that the relying parties, as they are, or enterprises, as you're doing identity verification, you could do it more effectively.
Sorry, I just need to make a quick correction. I said identity proofing as something that we don't have. We actually have it. We launched at Intuit the first version of identity proofing in partnership with a vendor. So we're using for certain cases. I just want to make that correction.
Right.
It's the evolution of identity proofing, raising the bar in terms of success rates for validating documents. But we already are on that, but we have to double down moving forward. Just want to make that correction.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? Does anybody have any questions for this back? Here, let me run the microphone since we're recording this thing.
Thank you for a great discussion. So I think the importance of MFA using your mobile phone is pretty much settled. Nobody's arguing that. I think the overwhelming discussion is around how to make it more secure and more better. In terms of user experience, what I have not heard much, should I say, is what if user loses her phone or his phone? What the user experience would be. I think that discussion is missing altogether.
Yeah, like that's a very good point. Like people who are not familiar with how to have backup factors, and specifically if you lose that primary factor, then how would you go about like recovering from that situation? And there obviously that's a big gap if you have that only single key. Like think about it, you have a single key to your home and you lose your key. What do you do in that case? You get somebody to actually give you a new key for you, right? So, but specifically in the corporate landscape, when you lose your key, which was given to you as a key identification factor, then you have to come back, verify that it's really you, who you are, which means that you have to go through a process which is not ideal. And that's where I think, like, especially the experiences that we have built, we make sure, or we try to guide people to set up multiple factors as they're going through the enrollment process. And we really don't want to go with an option of giving you backup codes, right? That's because you're going back to, again, weaker forms. So clearly not the ideal way, but having some sort of a process, and every process will be different for every business. But having some sort of a process which is worked with various different stakeholders in your organization, I think is a key aspect to make sure you are having MFA, but at the same time it is supportable when things go wrong, right? I think that's where our strategy has been.
I just note that account recovery in the FIDO world is a challenge, right? We've identified this. If you lose your private key, you lose your device. How do you do account recovery? And that was one of the drivers actually for us launching this identity verification program, because account recovery right now is a gap. It's a security gap because most account recovery and account enrollment processes actually default to password-based authentication. So we're trying to move beyond that here again, where your verified identity can be bound to your FIDO credentials, and so when account recovery or re-enrollment is much more secure than the current process.
Yeah, I think every technology has its kind of dirty little secret. SAML got rid of all these crappy passwords, but really what you did was replace just with one crappy password to get into all your accounts.
Yeah, so I cite the new identity verification work that we're doing as one thing, but we actually had a paper that has a variety of recommendations for how to do account recovery. So it's not just that. It's not just better enrollment. There's better practices, and we do best practice papers. Having redundant tokens. There's other recommendations in there like delegated account authorization. So there's other ways you can help plan ahead for your users' account recovery, and we are very focused on that.
We got a question out here.
Oh, I was thinking you were teeing up the easy one for me as a carrier, and I actually have two answers for you. First off, obviously users have to set up multiple factors in order to be able to get through when their primary factor, which might be a FIDO authenticator, is not going to work. And that's internal to a carrier. Obviously, I'll take them through 3 factors to make sure that they're passing the bar. External, the signals available to you, we're trying to fix that because, right, SMS, OTP, and there's a bunch of other really crappy ways of trying to authenticate users. And SMS, as we said before, is not an authentication protocol. So, we're trying to solve that. And the 4 carriers are working together to try and get better signals so that you can see those devices have been replaced. As a signal, again, you would need your own multiple factors to authenticate those.
You asked a great question, but your MFA strategy is as good as your backup factor when the main device is lost, right? So we can't just fall back to, use a password, because that doesn't work. So back to his point, that's where you got to have things like identity proofing. You got to prove yourself. If you have another trusted device that you can use to be able to provision a new account. So if you have passive signals available on another device that you own, if you have identity proofing, if you have a driver's license you can use. So you have to create options for your users to be able to re-provision, get back to their phone, and that's non-negotiable. You can't just wave your arms and say, well, lost the phone, then just enter your password, because that's exactly what the bad guys are going to say. I lost my phone, right? So you got to have options, and that's what our customers expect.
All right, we got a question here. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This was a really useful discussion, so I appreciate it. I just wanted to ask a little bit about CTAP and what some of the expanded use cases you might see coming over the hill with CTAP, and also the context that the whole discussion has been around is still binary in terms of authentication. So do you, I guess a forward-looking question, do you see a RBAC or ABAC playing a role in terms of step-up or adaptive types of mechanisms?
So CTAP used in conjunction with WebAuthn is part of the strategy. It's something you should look into. We are looking into it. No pun intended into it, but it's a protocol that it in combination with the W3C with WebAuthn and FIDO, it's the best combination possible to be able to access local sensors securely from the browser, your M web, your mobile web, or your desktop web. So yes, go forward with it. The question on ABAC, it's interesting because it's what we're been working right now as we speak at Intuit, is the granularity of access control. I think we're living now a world that staying at the role-based access control, it's not good enough. That we need to go into the attribute-based access control. ABAC is a normal path, but the most important part is not just say I support ABAC. The most important part is how you define the policies that are going to govern the access across the different players in your ecosystem. In our case, we have very different players in our ecosystem, and sometimes they play a role that the attributes they need to access are available, and sometimes it's not, depending on the role they're playing. So going to that level of granularity for attributes is, I think, the right direction moving forward.
Specifically to CTAB, like a couple of days I gave a quick demo in terms of like the progress so far, in terms of like the kind of devices and the core browsers that actually support, so Mac, Chrome, Edge, and Hello, and Android devices. So there's a great start in that direction, and I think like there's a ton of progress done in terms of newer devices being capable of that, but everything is newer, right? So you have to think about what do you do with the existing capabilities that the end users might have. So yeah, definitely like think about ways to make sure the experience is gelled in terms of thinking about newer plus also the existing ecosystem. So regarding authorization and RBAC, ABAC, so that's an interesting aspect. So you can come up with rules which are, regardless of RBAC, ABAC, like you need to be in this specific role or you need to have these specific attributes. But things where it get interesting is when you can make this stuff like dynamic in nature, meaning Tejas is director of a movie, 1, 2, 3, 4, working in a location somewhere, let's say in India, right? And in this specific language, like it's a nature of statically defined stuff, but dynamic in nature as well. So that's where I term that as an adaptive ODZ is where at least like we are headed towards as well. So.
All right, we're out of time. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the panelists, and have a good rest of the conference for the next 3 hours or so.